We will be having questions today, but we don't have the chat open. That has been disabled. The option now is for us to use Q&A instead. So welcome to our presentation. It's a joint session of the ACL and FEMA presentation, preparing for disasters in islands and coastal communities. And this is the last of a series of 4 webinars. Been focusing on persons with disabilities and older persons before, during, and after disasters. And as we're coming to the end of September, this is National Preparedness Month. And for more information, please visit ready.gov, ready.gov, or listo.gov. And today's theme is starting a conversation. The possibility of bad things happening, such as disasters or emergencies, is a real thing, and the conversation's never really easy. And today's webinar will help to promote that conversation within your family or within your community. And we'll be hearing today from Sherman Gillums. He's the director of FEMA's Office of Disability Integration and Coordination, the DEIC. We'll also hear from Faye Gordon, who is ACL's regional director for Region 9, or regional administrator, rather. And then we'll hear from some grantees of ACLs and what it is that they've learned in their important work by supporting senior adults and people with disabilities before, during, and after disasters in island and coastal communities. And at the very end of our session today, we'll have Q&A. Add anything you'd like during that session. And you can also put things in the Q&A during our session today. I do want to introduce now Sherman Gillums. He's FEMA's disability coordinator, and works at the Office of Disability Integration and Coordination since 2022. Prior to joining FEMA, he led the strategy, operations, and impact of the National Alliance on Mental Illness and served as executive director of Paralyzed Veterans of America and chief strategy and advocacy officer for AMVETS. And Sherman served as in the Marines for 12 years and then went on to obtain his graduate degrees from the University of San Diego School of Business and the University of Dayton. Now let's hand it over to Sherman.
Thank you, Lisa. And thanks to all of you for being here today. It's so good to see so many people being a part of this discussion. To start with the visual description, I am a man of medium brown complexion. I have circle-rimmed, sort of gold-colored glasses, and I'm wearing my olive drab FEMA polo shirt today, sitting in front of a blue FEMA background with the words FEMA and the logo for Department of Homeland Security next to it. I want to start by going back in time a little bit. I was stationed on mainland Japan in August of 1996 when Typhoon Kirk hit the Pacific region, reaching peak winds of about 110 miles per hour. The island is approximately the size of California, for those of you who have never been to Japan. So when a large weather system moves over the island nation, it can present a threat to literally every life in the impacted region. Now that became all too real to me after a service member was swept away during that storm, only to eventually, I'm seeing that the caption stopped. I just want to make sure that somebody knows the caption stopped. That became all too real to me after a service member was swept away during the storm, only to eventually end up in front of me as I photographed his lifeless body for the naval medical examiner after they found him. And his loss for me symbolized the consequences of disasters for me in ways that were both sobering and unforgettable to present day.
Sorry, this is Lisa. Forgive me. The captions have stopped, so I just want to make sure the captions are working. And if they have not been, I would prefer that we start over again, just to make sure that the captions are working first. I'm not sure why they're not.
And I'll hold fast until someone lets me know that the captions are working.
Hi there, this is the captioner. The captions were working at first. Let me hold on here. I don't know what's going on. Let's see.
Okay, we'll take our time to make sure we get this right. This is important information.
Okay, they're working now. I'm showing they're working. Just ensure that the closed caption is on. Okay, I'm gonna send a test.
I don't see anything with the captioning, and I also wasn't sure if there was actually a link where they can go to view.
Yeah, that wasn't sent to you because I'm the captioner, but the company should have, the captioning agency should have sent that to you. Let me reach out to them. Just give me a minute, one moment.
Let me see. I can go look to see if they sent it. But typically, we
Yeah.
like to have the captions inside the web
Right.
Zoom
And they will be. Please check your email because they normally will send that, and they automatically paste the API into okay, there it goes. I see the captions. Let's see. This is so weird. Hold on.
Thank you for your patience to all the participants. These meetings are recorded, so we want to make sure that for future audiences that we get the captioning right. So again, thank you for your patience.
Okay, just a second. Okay, give me 2 minutes. I'm going to try something else. I have reached out for support, but just give me about 2 minutes. Thank you for your patience.
Okay.
Okay, now check and see if you can see them. I'm gonna start captioning.
Okay, again, I'm Lisa, and it seems our captions are working currently. And I'm just testing that that is the case. Then Sherman, if you don't mind, please start your presentation again. And thank you so much, everyone, for your patience.
Sure thing. I'll start with a quick visual description. I am a male of medium brown complexion. I have an olive drab FEMA polo shirt on, and I'm sitting in front of a FEMA background that's blue with gray letters that spell FEMA and the Department of Homeland Security logo. Now, for people with disabilities of all types, whether it involves someone like me who uses a wheelchair, someone who uses sign language to communicate, or someone who uses a screen reader to hear what they cannot see, the question we'll try to answer today will be, how can I best ensure that I or my loved one will not face greater danger than others because of an access or functional need that must be accommodated? We're here today to answer that question for those who live in the Asia Pacific, Hawaiian Island, and Pacific Island regions of the world, where preparedness is the true first response and communities are the true first responders in the lead up to dangerous storm systems that have become increasingly common in that region of the world. Today, we'll hear from people who actively work to ensure individuals, families, and entire communities in which people with disabilities belong understand the danger in Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander communities. As you listen to them, I encourage you to think about any lessons or takeaways that can inform your own preparedness, which is the purpose of this webinar. During this final webinar of 4 that FEMA and ACL co-hosted this year, we highlight Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander communities to demonstrate our commitment to eradicating barriers to communication in times of crisis and acknowledge the resilience and readiness that those communities have shown and will show whenever the skies turn gray. Thank you for joining us today. Back to you, Lisa.
All right, thank you so much. This is Lisa Bothwell. I forgot to add my visual description earlier. I am a white woman with shoulder length brown hair and a black jacket, white shirt. And I will go ahead and turn it over to our ACL's Regional Administrator for Region 9, Faye Gordon.
Great. Thank you so much, Lisa. I'm Faye. I am ACL's Regional Administrator for Region 9. So that means I get to work with American Samoa, Arizona, California, the Northern Mariana Islands, Guam, Hawaii, and Nevada, as well as 61 Title VI tribal grantees. I am located in ACL's San Francisco office. A brief visual description: I am a white woman, I am bald, and I have a pink shirt on, and behind me is my desk in my San Francisco office. I am so pleased to be part of this webinar. The Administration for Community Living administers aging and disability programs, and we fund networks of community-based organizations that serve people with disabilities, older adults, and family caregivers across the country, as well as engaging in disability research. We also serve as the advisor to the Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services on disability and aging policy, and we work across the Department of Health and Human Services and the federal government on policies that impact older adults and people with disabilities. Our work is always informed by our strong engagement with stakeholders, particularly people with disabilities, older adults, family caregivers, as well as state and local governments. And from this work with our stakeholders, we know that older adults and people with disabilities are disproportionately impacted by natural disasters. This may be because they may have challenges evacuating or getting information due to accessibility issues. They may lose access during a natural disaster to critical services, particularly durable medical equipment, which we've seen in recent natural disasters. And during recovery, they may be placed in nursing facilities and other institutions that are not accessible and are not their setting of first choice. And we know that statistically, the risk of death is 4 times higher in a natural disaster. After disaster, these disproportionate impacts can continue to occur. We know that 74% of disaster evacuees who use a wheelchair have reported experiencing a lack of food up to a month after a disaster compared to other individuals who are able to walk. We know that 70% of deaf people who have been evacuated in a natural disaster report challenges in their conditions up to a month post-disaster, compared to 7% of people who are not deaf. And we know that older adults are twice as likely to experience post-traumatic stress disorder and almost twice as likely to develop an adjustment disorder after a natural disaster. We want to ensure that older adults and people with disabilities have the information and resources that they need to be informed, safe, and healthy during and after a disaster. We want to change these statistics and make sure these statistics do not continue. So our goal is to engage with you, stakeholders, and the communities that you serve before disasters happen, so we can change this tide. This is a priority issue for the Biden-Harris administration, which we saw reflected in the previous 2 years of budgets from the president. In fiscal year 24, the president proposed a human services disaster fund that would provide funding to ACL's aging and disability networks. We also saw in the proposal for fiscal year 25, an inclusive disaster preparedness initiative that would help local aging and disability networks strengthen their relationships with emergency management services. And so today we are building on this momentum and this initiative to work across the federal government, including at the regional level, and develop these partnerships for communication and education. And we're proud to be working with FEMA, the Administration for Strategic Preparedness and Response, and the Administration for Children and Families on these disaster issues. Today, we're focusing specifically on island areas, where we're really thrilled to hear from our guest speakers on these particular issues, because we know that due to their unique climate and location, these areas are at increased risk for severe weather and natural disasters. Specifically, as we all remember, last year in 2023, Maui was devastated by a historic wildfire. Through a collaborative effort within Region 9 at the Department of Health and Human Services, I met with local aging providers in Maui after the wildfire. And hearing from them, I was astonished by their rapid mobilizing and their dedication to working with their communities. They stayed up all night throughout the weeks following the wildfire. They would turn their cars into mobile offices. They created phone trees, all to find their clients and quickly set up services for them so they did not face these service interruptions. Their unrelenting and exhausting efforts to ensure their clients did not face additional destruction and challenges beyond what the disaster brought to them was an example of true collaboration, and I'm grateful we'll be able to hear from their perspective this morning. We recognize that these response and recovery activities should not take a one-size-fits-all approach, but they are best served when they're driven by the community and by a community focus on addressing individual client needs. So we appreciate everyone who is here today for your interest and your experience in these disasters. And I do want to end by asking anyone who is participating with personal lived experience as an older adult or a person with disability, please make your voice heard by engaging in preparedness, recovery, and response efforts in your community. We want to support you at ACL, and ACL's grassroots advocacy initiative is here to help people become educated about policies and how they can impact those policies. We know that it is important to advocate together because we know a collective voice is stronger than a voice alone. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Lisa, and I just want to again thank our speakers from Hawaii and Guam for sharing their personal experience. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Faye. And this is Lisa speaking again. We'll go ahead and introduce our next panel. Well, first we'll hear from two speakers, a two-person panel, and then we'll have our final presenter. And we have Leslie Tunaway. She is the Director of Elderly Services at ALU Like Incorporated, and she oversees the implementation of the Older Americans Act, Title VI. These are services for Native Hawaiians on the Hawaiian Islands of Hawaii, Maui, Molokai, and Oahu. She had the fortune of growing up with her parents and grandparents who provided her, grandparents rather, with the set of foundation for the work that she does with the elderly. And then we have Carolyn Karirau, who is the director of the state of Hawaii's Executive Office of Aging since June of 2019. And prior to this current position, Carolyn had nearly 20 years of program management experience with the state unit of aging implementing the Older Americans Act, and coordinated the statewide system of elder care and caregiver support services in Hawaii. Carolyn led the Aging and Disability Resource Center's efforts, as well as its community living program and the veteran-directed care. And Carolyn has almost 30 years of experience in the field of aging advocacy and programming. And so I'll turn it over to Leslie and Carolyn now.
Aloha, everyone. I'm Leslie Tanoy, as was mentioned, with Alulike. So I serve Native Hawaiians on most of the major Hawaiian islands. And I'm here with Carolyn Karirau, as was mentioned. So we're showing you some pictures, and we're going to do it together because we're both from the same area, but with different perspectives. I'm, focused on Native Hawaiians, and usually found a lot more in smaller rural communities that we'll be discussing. So the picture you see before you is one of a tsunami that hit Hawaii Island in the city of Hilo. You can just see the destruction on that. On the next slide, a little variety that you can see that Hawaii faces. So on the first three to your left, I guess, would be different hurricanes. So we've had substantial hurricanes in 1982, 1992, which are the three. And then in the circle is, again, another one of the tsunami. You could just see the force. Top right was the most recent hurricane that actually hit Hawaii, direct hit. And then we have, unlike many places, lava. And so that is special, I think, a very different type. And then I'll touch on that, how that's very different for Native Hawaiians in particular. So the eruption, this is like probably a 2018 eruption, but the lava has flown from Kilauea continuously from about January of 1983 through this point, and then we've just had pop-ups and downs, and we just had it kind of slow down again. Okay, so if you go to the next slide, this is the most recent, as Faye mentioned, of the severe impacts of the wildfire in Lahaina. On the left, you can see what used to be, what is, and what was. Things look very different now. It's just a decimated piece of flat land, which has devastated the location, but I think as people of Hawaii in general, When things happen, we consider one another family, whether you are ethnically linked or not. So we care for one another. So there's a big difference on these issues, right? Hurricanes, volcanoes, tsunamis, landslides, wildfires. They have tended to hit very specific areas. Usually, as was mentioned earlier, first responders tend to be other islanders, other people of Hawaii who are able to quickly jump in because we care for one another like family. So it's a different type of culture. But there are also larger things that have been possible. In 2018, there was Hurricane Lane. That was a Category 5, which its span was substantially larger than the whole state of Hawaii, which had that come to us, it would have devastated us completely, which means there is no other support system readily in place. We are far from anything else. All of 90% of the goods that come to Hawaii, be it food, product, anything, building material, comes from off island, it either has to be flown in or barged in, shipped in. So if something catastrophic like a Category 5 hurricane came in, it would destroy all of our infrastructure. With climate change, we have rising sea levels, changes in the temperature. A hurricane of that capacity would have devastated us with just the storm surges and everything. And being an island community, and because everything comes in that way, everything is very close to the water in Hawaii because of shipping. So all of our ports would have been destroyed. All of our airports, all of our electric generating things are all on the coast. All of our food storage, all of our warehousing, all of these things would have killed us, and not literally killed us, but devastated us beyond. And then if all of those things happen, nothing really can come into us, not easily. Disasters impact smaller rural communities very different. So in preparation for Hurricane Lane, as a Title VI, so Native Hawaiian Serving Elderly organization, our goal was, luckily we know ahead of time, right? We have NOAA, we have the Hurricane Center, we have the Tsunami Centers, all that can give us the information that things are coming. So it allows us some preparation time, right? And again, preparation incorporates communication and things, but some of the things that we did as an organization was to make sure we got food out. And food is limited in Hawaii. And I don't mean that we don't have it, we just have different access. So food comes in, like I said, 90% of everything comes in on a barge, on a plane. So we have probably like a 3-day supply of everything that gets replenished constantly. Boats come in, planes come in constantly bringing us supplies. So the goal during that preparation was to make sure that we had food to our elders, with shelter in place, if that's possible. Because again, we don't have enough shelters for everybody anyway. Not enough, and definitely not shelters that can withstand Category 5 hurricanes. But we made sure we got food, at least food that would keep people for 4 or 5 days. In Hawaii, the push has always been to have 2 weeks supply of food, water, medications, all of those things. But I don't think, as a Native Hawaiian serving organization and community, elderly community in general in Hawaii, people believe in their government. In general, elderly people believe in their government. So they think that the government is actually going to come and save you. There is that assumption that there's that reliance on the government to a degree. And I say that to a degree because Native Hawaiians in general also have some lack of trust in government as a Native population. So there's a lot of things that, so as an organization like myself, it is a constant communication, a constant push, ongoing reminders. So at our elderly service sites, we are constantly talking about preparedness. But I think, as we've all learned since 2019, you don't ever imagine how bad things can get until they happen. You never imagined COVID was coming. We never imagined a fire like this could ever devastate our home. There are just so many things, but cultural norms and assumptions that the government will take care of us. But if we're all living on an island with all limited, there is not a magic warehouse holding food and medical supplies. Native Hawaiians have high rates of diabetes and high utilization of dialysis. All of those supplies aren't coming in, aren't available. It's not a stockpile. So our population would suffer severely. Um, we're just so isolated from any kind of help that could come immediately. So help won't come for 4+ days because how are you going to get onto an airport landing strip if it's devastated? How are you going to come into a harbor that's devastated? Things don't just happen immediately. Like people think it's not a magic wand and the government falls from the sky and FEMA comes in to save us. But in regards to cultural norms for Native Hawaiians, lava and a lot of nature kind of relating, although these are all of nature, are have different a different aspect. So with the lava, even when it was taking some of our seniors' homes, um, it's seen differently. It is seen as a cleansing. A lot of Native people have connections to nature and things like that. So uh, the lava flows and all of that. In Hawaii, there is a deity-like thought process of it. So you are welcoming this person back into reclaiming the land, reclaiming the home, cleaning the area. So the loss, psychological changes, the expectations are very different than hurricanes, storms, landslides and fires. There's just so many things, but we are very fortunate. I am very fortunate to work well with our State Unit on Aging and our AAAs. So they are our support network. And so I think Caroline can take it.
Thank you so much, Leslie. Again, my name is Caroline Karirau. I'm the director for the State Unit on Aging here in Hawaii, known as the Executive Office on Aging. And yes, you can see by these pictures on this slide the devastation of Lahaina, and we know that these portraits have gone national and international, but just to share with you what we've been through. And thank you, Leslie, so much for touching on the cultural aspects of fires on lava and how that is portrayed differently than say something like what happened in Lahaina or a tsunami or hurricane destruction that we've had over the years. Could you advance to the next slide, please? So some of the impacts that Leslie touched on, was that whole isolation from the continental United States. And then there's also, in my role as a State Unit on Aging, that governance and the processes that Leslie touched upon too, as far as our older adults having that belief that the government's going to come in and provide. And we do, but I will tell you, especially, and because it's still so fresh in our minds, what we've been through with Lahaina is the mobilization, Faye said it earlier, of the community coming together, mobilizing quickly to support their community at the ground level. It was just amazing. I'm an attached agency to the Department of Health. I sit on the Department of Operations Centers. We call it the DOC. So when there's a hurricane or there's a fire such as this, the DOC is mobilized. We work with FEMA. We work with HIEMA. Our Director of Health is the Incident Command person, and then there's the various sections within the doc. I am part of the functional needs unit under the operations section. So myself and Dr. Daintree Bertolis with the Developmental Disabilities Council sits on the functional needs unit. So it's really having a voice, bringing the needs of our individuals with disabilities and our older adults to the table, addressing the needs that are coming from, say, American Red Cross and all of that. At the same time, Dr. Bertolis also created a disability advocacy work group that was addressing the needs of our disabled community. And really, she was a boots on the ground. Her and her staff were out on the island of Maui, just really going from hotel to shelters to find those individuals with disabilities to address their specific needs, because and those in the community understand that you've seen one disability, you've seen one disability. Everyone's situation is different. With older adults, you know, those with, say, a cognitive impairment, Alzheimer's, or dementia, how do we address their needs? Having them in a huge, say, a huge auditorium where it's loud and it's getting to the afternoon, they may have sundowners. How do we address those needs during these types of disasters? So next slide, please. And again, some of the impacts of a natural disaster. As you know, Hawaii is an island state. 25% of our state population are older adults. We have a state population of about 1.4 million. We have the highest longevity within the United States at 79.9 years of age. As mentioned earlier, everything is airlifted or coming by barge, delay in resources, looking at loss of life with the Maui wildfires, greatest in the last century, loss of property, loss of housing, the impact, the psychological impact from this type of disaster, the increase in diseases, the food and medical scarcity that we faced, and that whole infrastructure. One thing, and I think it's just because we live it and we're in it, but for those of you in this presentation today, that Category 5 Hurricane Lane was coming towards us. It never hit us. Had it hit us, like Leslie said, it would have been a very different picture. Our whole infrastructure would have been dismantled. And then the ecosystem disruptions, looking at the wildfire and sitting in the dock and hearing about what's the air quality in Lahaina, what is the water quality, when is water going to be restored back to Lahaina, all of those in those early days after the fires. And then the ocean and the fact that all the ships that were, or the boats that were there in the harbor and stuff had burned. So then you had oil in the waters and stuff. So that whole disruption to the ecosystem, and then the socioeconomic loss by those businesses that lost their businesses in Lahaina, and the impact of that and the long-term impact of that as they try to rebuild. Next slide, please. So we know this. This is easy, right? We talk about preparing for disaster. Have your emergency kit ready. Have a plan of action. Stay informed. Make sure you have a radio. Make sure your radio has batteries. We educate as a state unit on aging, as a Title VI provider. We educate our community to be prepared. When hurricane season starts, all that information is getting out there. We're telling people, be prepared, be prepared, be prepared. Make sure you have 2 weeks of water. Make sure you have this, make sure you have that. You can prepare, but when it actually hits, then that recovery is the important piece. For organizations, again, we educate and we support that planning process. We provide that access to timely, accurate information. We really collaborate with the stakeholders in the community. We assess needs prior to a disaster. Like Leslie said earlier, with hurricanes, we have those forewarnings, so we can start preparing or making sure and assessing our older adults, are our individuals with disabilities ready? And do they know where to go? And are they informed? And do they have a support system? We need to prepare for various scenarios because every scenario is different. And the last thing I'd like to share with you is what 2 of our 4 counties have done over the years, and something that our other 2 counties are looking at is having an older adult registry. So within the county of Hawaii and the county of Kauai, they have a registry. So when someone turns 60 years of age, they may not need services, obviously. I'm going to be 59 soon. I'm not going to need services in a year. But if I lived in the county of Hawaii, I could register. They would know, where does Caroline live if I lived in Hawaii County? So when there's something like lava flows, they can easily and quickly determine who's in the path of the lava flow and support them to either relocate so that they're not harmed. They may lose their property, but to get them to a safe place. So that registry is something, as a best practice, as a state, we're looking at doing statewide, and I think it's a really good idea. Next slide, please. So post-disaster support and recovery, and a lot of this is strategies we've put into place. Some of them is things that we learned from COVID, and again, things that we've learned from the Maui wildfires. Again, having accessible information, print, digital, in multiple languages. Very important because we have such a diverse community. I will say, I was watching the news, we were glued to the TV after the Maui wildfires, most of us. And in one of those, I saw a flyer that was up at one of the locations where people were being sheltered, and it had a QR code. So, of course, I went into immediate action thinking, not a lot of our older adults know how to use a QR code. Did they even get out with their cell phones? We don't know. So we ensured that there was information that was in print that could be handed out. So ensuring that there's multiple ways, access points for our older adults and individuals with disabilities, because not one size fits all. Again, immediate needs, food, medical supplies, and shelter. Implementing strategies to address that food insecurity. One of the things that we had available, because we had prepared during COVID, was ensuring that all 4 counties had MREs and could distribute those in an event of an emergency. We had done that very early, I think even before the emergency declaration of March 16th, 2020, we had ordered emergency supplies and made sure that every county had that. So when the wildfires hit, Maui County had that. They had a supply at the Office on Aging, and they got that out to their community. So that's one of the strategies on how we dealt with food insecurity. Collaborating on efforts to clothe and house the displaced, providing support at shelters and recovery centers. And one thing I want to add is that even though we have government, Maui County Office on Aging, the area agency, and our other area agencies, we really want them to follow the lead of their county, their emergency management system on island, and provide that support. So many of the staff at the Maui County Office on Aging had been deployed to the recovery centers, to the shelters, to provide that support, and ensuring that individuals and older adults with special needs are addressed. And we kind of talked about people with, whether they have autism, whether they have a specific need, or older adults with various needs, making sure that, and Dr. Sherman mentioned this earlier about access, keeping people from harm after they've been displaced. How do we ensure that that environment is safe for them? They've already been traumatized. They've already possibly lost their home or everything that they've owned. Now they're in a shelter. How do we support them to have an experience that's not going to traumatize them more? So that's something that we were looking at. Next slide, please. So some of these other strategies: strengthening coalition and structure building, asset mapping, identifying the gaps. What are the gaps that aren't being addressed after recovery, and how do we fill those gaps? Some of the other strategies that have been put into place is holding listening session to understand what those needs are, and really being nimble and leveraging resources. We learned that from the pandemic, right? Is how can we be creative and resourceful with the resources that we do have, and then taking what we've learned from that and applying these strategies to these recoveries that we've had, especially with the wildfires. And again, ensuring that we have a voice at the table. We did that with COVID to make sure that as they rolled out the vaccinations, that older adults had access, because some of the things that were being proposed weren't the most accessible for our older adults. So we've taken many of these learned best practices and are applying them to these natural disasters. And just to be that voice, to be that advocate at the State Unit on Aging, and also at our Title VI through Alulike. Next slide, please. These are some of the lessons learned from the Maui wildfires, and I'm not going to obviously read everything, but just want to highlight, of course, emergency preparedness. We went over that. Having a plan, making sure your family knows what that plan is, especially since we have so many families that are separated and families that live on the mainland. Make sure, if older adults and individuals with disabilities, if you're here and you have family members on the mainland, continental United States, that they know of your plan. What is your plan? Where will you be if a disaster hits? Community connections, finding ways to assist our older adults in developing that support network. Staying informed, making sure you know the latest information, and mental health awareness. Being part of the Department of Health, we supported some of the grant opportunities that were made available to our state, and being a voice for that on mental health awareness, and supporting our Department of Health as they applied for those grants, because we knew after the initial devastation of the wildfires that down the road, 6 months later, things are starting to settle in. That psychological impact of the wildfires would be taking its toll on our whole community, not just older adults and individuals with disabilities, but our whole community. Next slide, please. Assistance program and connections with social services, really ensuring that we know who our stakeholders are and supporting each other. Again, from the ground up, I will say that being on some of those calls at the local level with our Maui County Office on Aging, with our Developmental Disabilities Council, and being able to just support each other was a wonderful way of sharing resources. Again, home safety, make sure that your home is safe, that you can get out if there's a fire, that you have smoke detectors, engaging community organizations around home safety in the event of a disaster. Communication with family and other support networks, kind of touched on that. And really, lastly, building that resilience. Many of you have probably heard Maui Strong. They are very resilient. They will rebuild, but it's going to take time and support. And I think Leslie touched on it. No matter whether you're white like myself or someone with multi culture or ethnicities, such as my family. If you saw my children, they're chop suey. We call that of many different ethnicities, but we all come together as one community to support each other. And that's the beauty of being an island state and being able to just rely on each other and to support each other. And I think it's my last slide, but my next slide, please, is you can see some of the rebuilding. It's been tough, but anyway, you can see the ocean's blue again. It doesn't look as bad as a war zone. They're going to rebuild, but like I said, it will take time. This is a newer video of, a picture of Lahaina, but again, it will take time, but they will rebuild. And I will leave it at that. Leslie, did you want to say any last remarks?
And I think one other thing that I think we didn't touch on that's important in our island community is many of the households are multi-generational.
Mhm.
So sometimes the approach is very different and how we can, communicate and support is hard. And I think Maui was a great example of that, that families that usually are all together needed to be separated into different bits and pieces. So your innate support group might not always be there.
Right.
So
Yes, I
we-
forgot of the intergenerational. That's so true. And, for our older adults, and Leslie can attest to this too, many actually left for the continental US. And if you're in your 80s, I don't know if you'll be returning. And that's sad, and yeah. So, for younger people, they may return, they may come home. But this may have been a final move for these older adults that had to be relocated to the continental United States. So thank you, Leslie. And thank you for letting us share today. We really appreciate it.
Hi again, I'm Lisa and I'm speaking again. And I want to thank both of you for your remarks, both Leslie Dunaway and Carolyn Cotty-Round. I touched by your remarks, really. The fear of having to leave those islands and go to the continental United States, I can't imagine. There would be a fear of not returning, absolutely. So thank you for your stories. And I do want to move on to our next speaker. It's Charlene D. San Nicolas. And she's the Senior Citizen Administrator for the Guam State Office on Aging, the SOA. It's a division of senior citizens in the Guam Department of Public Health and Social Services.
Thank you.
Nicolas has over 10 years of work experience in child welfare under Guam's Title 20 funded Bureau of Social Services Administration. And Ms. San Nicolas has over 16 years of work experience in aging services, with 4 years overseeing the direct operations of the Transportation Services Program for the elderly who are age 60 and older island-wide. And I'll turn it over to you now, Charlene.
Thank you. If we can go ahead and put up that slide, the PowerPoint that was provided, and maybe go to slide number 2. There we go. Thank you. So just want to just share, if we can enlarge that a little bit. I, in 2023, in July, did a presentation on disaster preparedness with our state health insurance and Medicare assistance project. They had an annual conference, so very fortunate to present on Guam's Category 4 storm. We just heard from Hawaii that shared the challenges should a Category 5 hit their islands. The same thing for Guam would hit. So provided on this slide really are photos just showing the devastation that it caused when this Typhoon Mawar had hit Guam. Again, it was a Category 4 with wind speeds of 140 miles per hour. There was a link of a video that we provided as to the impact. So we haven't had a large storm of this nature in almost 20 years. It was the strongest typhoon that Guam had endured over 2 decades. And as Hawaii had pointed out, yes, we get notices to prepare and prepare, right? Making sure we have canned goods, making sure our vehicles are fueled up. We actually started receiving a notice on May 19th, which is a Friday, at about 10 o'clock in the morning. We get our notices for upcoming tropical disturbances from Guam's Joint Homeland Security Office. That also includes our Emergency Operations Center individuals. And within the Emergency Operations Center, I do want to do a big plug out. We have ESF 8, which is public health. And so our little division of senior citizens is part of the public health response. So we share whatever information is coming in from the Joint Information Center. So one of the great things is the notice already going out to the people of Guam that there's a tropical disturbance. And key part is, as Hawaii has also mentioned, stay informed, listen to the news, whether it be on the radio, on television, or on print. At least we're already getting notices to come out. And that was on a Friday morning. That same notice was sent to our aging network. So Guam is a single planning area. We receive funding from Administration for Community Living to provide home and community-based services. And our services that we provide on Guam include adult daycare, island-wide, case management, island-wide, in-home services, island-wide, legal assistance, island-wide, senior centers, transportation, and we've got congregate meals, homebound meals, caregiver services. We've got our Title VII, our elder abuse and ombudsman, but we're focusing a lot really on our Title III supportive services. That's where the bulk of our seniors that we provide service to are receiving services. So when we were notified, we have a high-risk listing. So we gathered that up, we coordinated that and filtered it to our village mayor. So our population is not as large. We are extremely rural. Our population is about 153,000 individuals. Off that amount, 11.2% are elderly. In 2023, we serviced over 3,000 elders in our island. Guam is about 30 miles long. You know, sometimes it's hard to visualize. So we're about a 7-hour flight from Guam to Honolulu. So if that could put some perspective. So this devastating storm did hit us. As we had prepared, we were able to look at emergency dry goods service, dry goods for our congregate clients. And of course, congregate are those seniors that attend senior centers and adult daycare centers. Also preparing dry goods for our home delivered meals clients that we provide service Monday through Sunday for. So when the disaster did strike us, it struck us on May 24th. On the 25th, it would have been one of our annual Senior Citizens Month events. I believe it was our Guam Governor's Conference on Aging, which we already had sent out messaging that will be canceled as we are preparing for this storm. Some other items that we looked at for storm preparation, when we start hearing about the joint information or impending storm, is we look at making sure our aging network is informed to be prepared. We want our transportation to make sure their vehicles are fueled, our nutrition providers to make sure that they're stocking up. our case management to start looking at who are their high-risk listing of seniors. How many of those seniors are living by themselves that are 60 and older with no family support on island, right? Those would be the ones to really look at. How many of our seniors are relying on oxygen and may need a generator or don't have a generator? How many seniors are living by the seaside? How many seniors are living in tin and wooden structure? So as you can see, some of the devastation from the picture that's up, you've got pictures of roofing being blown away. So those are key areas. Our partnership, aside from our aging network, is to also work with our village mayors. There are 19 villages on Guam, and each of them also know who their constituents are in terms of those that are in greatest need. Those who, when there's a need for evacuation, usually it's our schools that are used as shelters. And the reason for that, a lot of them are concrete and cement. And so those shelter notices will also go out as part of the JIC release. So what we do at our office for preparedness is, aside from getting out the JIC notices, making sure the vehicles are filled up, reviewing any CAD messaging that's going to be going out for our joint information, reviewing our emergency plan, internally, making sure everyone is securing their equipment. Anything that, such as UPS, that's being used for computer connections are lifted off in the event that there's flooding. Making sure we have access to emergency supplies, flashlights, lanterns, extra batteries, water, emergency first aid kits, portable radios if that's available. So that's part of our preparedness. Yeah, of course, getting the listing of the high-risk notices to our village mayors, making sure that we also have it in the event we need to follow up. So when the event hit us on a Wednesday, we went back and then started to move towards recovery, making sure once the seniors are secured, then we had to go back into recovery, and that meant checking the senior centers, our daycare, all our vendors that they're able to provide services. So I would like to just share that one of the things that our regional administrator, Faye Gordon, had mentioned is that in terms of our special needs population, there was a post-storm shelter that was stood up, and this was very specific to those individuals, elderly and individuals with a disability, who were not able to hook up for oxygen. So that we saw as a huge need. We didn't have power for weeks. We move to the next slide. So some of our pre-activities I've kind of mentioned. Post-storm, we already had to start looking at damage assessment reports, meaning going out to look at our facilities that are owned. How many of them are we able to go back to? Our high-risk client status, shifting from congregate meals, because congregate sites then became closed as there's no water, there's no power. We needed to then, of course, seek a grantor approval if we can provide grab-and-go meals. Have our case management caseworkers go out and assess those who may be in a storm shelter, and if they were 60 and older, if they needed access for care coordination. We also started to become notified about participating in disaster SNAP or food stamps. If we can go to the next slide. Some of the things that happened right after a storm, a category 4, at least in our situation, is we had long lines for fueling. Power restoration took several days, if not weeks. On the left side, you're going to see a lineup, and this is one of our highways lining up for fuel. So we had people waiting 7+ hours for fuel, and definitely more than 7 days for power restoration, right? So those are things that we saw that happen, that post-storm shelter needed to be stood up for those, especially for those using oxygen. Not everybody has the has the great fortune of having a portable oxygen tank. I think some of the current ones that are being used are almost like the diving helium tanks. And imagine being an elder 60 plus and you're having to lug that diving looking portable oxygen. So and even at that, I don't believe that it has enough long-lasting oxygen. I mean, some of it may be having only maybe a couple hours, depending on what type of oxygen level an elder or an individual with a senior may be. So wanted to share that positive note, that having the post-storm shelter stood up. Other activities is when the disaster struck Guam on the 24th, we were able that our daycare, at least our northern daycare, was able to go back up and operational on June 14th, 2023. Hawaii had mentioned, thinking about those who may have Alzheimer's or dementia, making sure they're back to normal in terms of their functional needs for our clients. So very happy to report on that. Also happy to share that our legal assistance network provider, in addition to a Micronesian Legal Services Corp, we're able to help those that were needing legal advice, especially for those that may have to appeal FEMA denial applications. So those grassroots people were out and about to be there. I also want to share that when we talk about boots on the ground, we often hear nurses, we hear the fire, and we hear the police. I do want to share for the aging network, our grassroots boots on the people include our transporters, these individuals that pick up seniors to go to the dialysis centers, pick up seniors to go to the congregate meal sites, our nutrition workers who are nutrition delivery drivers who see seniors in Guam every day because we provide meal service Monday through Sunday. Our in-home workers, also their boots on the ground, and our case management workers, in addition to the respite workers. So want to share that when we look in terms of planning and more coordination, we also look at them. I know that we were getting requests, can they be included as part of the fuel? So at the time after the storm hit, one of the challenges we encountered was access to fuel for some of these drivers. So hoping that next time around that our voices are heard and we can be included. We were able to, again, aside from our daycare going back up on June 14th, we had 60% of our congregate sites also up and about, and with power being restored, water being restored. In terms of dry goods, we don't support the MREs. And the reason for that is the high sugar content. So on our site, we did write out and sought guidance. So just want to bring that out. And as Hawaii has mentioned, we are a little island. So a lot of our fuel, our food, it's shipped in. It's either shipped in or it's flown in. So that is what we have. I do want to just do a shout out, aside from just our network. When disaster strikes, we want to say thank you to those at the Emergency Operations Center. Thank you to those power utility workers that, aside from our aging network, these individuals also leave their homes to go out and make sure that power is being restored and often overlooked. So I just want to bring that up. Under the Guam Public Health or Emergency Support Function 8 individuals operating through the Public Health Emergency Preparedness, very instrumental. Anytime we had any concerns or issues, it was very nice to call a number, if we were able to call a number and or email whatever concerns that we have. So and again, aside from that, I want to say thank you to my staff of Plenty for being able to shift. Aside from doing post-storm recovery, we also had to get some of our network staff ready to also provide support to the disaster snap. So we move on to the next slide. This is a portion of grab and go. On the left side are grab and go at one of our senior centers, and on the right side is our daycare delivering a grab and go meal to one of our daycare clients. So we also had to shift our delivery of service. Next slide. This is a picture of disaster snap on Guam. The left side is one of our largest malls where that was the lineup inside as people were applying for supplemental nutrition assistance program benefits. the right side is another mall, and the line went outside. I know we started from about physically in there about 6 a.m. Lines, I think, opened up at about 7 or 8, did not end until maybe around 9, 10, and it continued for more than a week. And so that's also a big public coordination in terms of pulling individuals from the aging network to also help support. So with that, I do want to comment our case management staff, who are caseworkers that help those get access to services. We're also helping us out on the lines to assess to see if there are any seniors who may need additional service. So this is what I have to report. And that ends my presentation.
Thank you very much, Charlene. Really appreciate you sharing about Guam. I'll go ahead and start the Q&A portion of the seminar, of the webinar rather. And we did have a question in the chat, and feel free to add any other questions that you might have. One of the questions in the chat right now is, how do people who are blind or deafblind, how are they served in a shelter in particular? How are they being provided information? Is it provided to them in Braille? And how are staff trained to help those particular individuals? So I wanted to see if anyone in particular wanted to respond to this question. Hold on one moment. And we could have one of our panelists to answer this question. I believe, Carolyn, you have your hand raised.
Yes, I know that my understanding, I could be wrong, maybe FEMA could correct me, but I do know that like American Red Cross.
I'm so sorry. Does seem that I'm sorry to interrupt you again. This is Lisa signing. It seems that our captions have stopped, and I am sorry for this technical difficulty. Is there someone here who can turn on
Yes,
the?
I'm trying to work on the caption. So the captions are going to have to be captioned within Zoom. Our captioner had to jump off. So we have to use the captioner within the Zoom webinar.
Okay, then. So that's Marcia. Who was speaking? You're the host still, right, Marcia?
Yeah, I am still the host, but I also have Mary Kate as co-host because I'm having some difficulties with my internet connection.
So Mary Kate, then if you just let me know when we can go ahead and start again, please, when captions are up and running.
Sure, I am looking into it right now.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, let's test and see what it looks like currently. I don't see any captions showing at the moment. Testing. Okay, now I think we're back up and running. All right, fantastic. So again, we'll repeat this question again. Is it how do people who are blind or deafblind in a shelter in an emergency situation, how would they receive information? Would that be in Braille? How are staff trained or receive training? Where would that come from? And how do you? And I think it was Charlene who was going to answer the question of how you might interact with these persons. I'm not sure. Charlene? I'm sorry, not Carolyn, rather.
Actually, both of us are chatting together. Yes, American Red Cross would provide in the Emergency Operations Center at the shelters, would provide for those who may be blind and or deaf. And Charlene, did you want to add anything?
No, I just want to just confirm, correct. So there are any special needs that are needed for the shelters? It's typically at the Emergency Operations Center, right? That will let us know what are the special needs. Population, so deaf and blind definitely would be something that those who are managing, right, charged with the shelter will bring up in terms of that type of need. A very good question.
May I also answer the question?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
This is Sherman from FEMA's Office of Disability Integration and Coordination. It is also FEMA's responsibility to ensure that through its recovery services and individual assistance services, that we provide a way for any number of language needs to be met, and that includes the deaf-blind community. I had a chance to interact with advocates last year. I got a chance to watch the magic of how communication happens, so it's not a big mystery. But what we need to do is make sure that community stakeholders know to bring those issues to FEMA and to me specifically if they're not being met in the field. We do have contracts for obtaining those services. Some cases it may prove difficult if we don't have people available who can perform that. That's why it's imperative for all of you in the community to help out by ensuring that we elevate people who have these skills and ways of communicating so that in times of crisis, we can access those skills, and we can use any number of ways to do that. But there should be no excuse why any survivor in any disaster goes without an adequate means of communication assistance if needed.
Okay, thank you very much, Sherman. And these are some questions that, since I don't see any more in the Q&A that I've come up with, and from your experience, who are your strongest partners in disasters and in emergency situations? What types of resources and supports do they bring to the table? And how do you partner with them in serving people with disabilities or older adults? And perhaps how that partnership started. Anyone? Go ahead, Charlene.
I'll go ahead. Thank you. I do want to say definitely Emergency Operations Center, FEMA, Office of Homeland for ESF8 Public Health. During our Category 4 storm typhoon that hit us, we needed generators. We have a protective services shelter whose access to electricity was not available. Our state office, our backup generator was down. So we were able to be powered up. So we're able to communicate with Region 9 to let them know what's happening. We needed water buffalo as well, because without water, you're not able to flush the toilet, wash your hands, that type of stuff. So they are very crucial. Also, our village mayors, very crucial. And of course, our leadership within public health. And again, going back to our grants or administration for community living, to keep them informed what's happening. So they're able to elevate issues that may arise.
Okay, thanks so much, Charlene. I just wanted to see if any of our other panelists from Hawaii would like to answer that question.
Just echoing, hi Caroline here, just echoing what Charlene said. Really, that support from both the federal level, the state level, and then the local is very important. Thank you.
Okay, and Faye, Sherman, anything else you'd like to add? Please let me know. Just come on screen.
Nothing to add. Thank you.
Okay. I saw Dr. Sherman come up and wasn't sure if he was going to speak. So you may have discussed this already, but please feel free to add anything more. But I was just wondering, what recommendations do you have for older adults or people with disabilities who live in island and coastal communities, and how they might coordinate or manage their needs before, during, and after a disaster? Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Dr. Sherman.
Thank you, Lisa. I'd begin by encouraging older adults to sit down with family members and have discussions on what possible relocation may look like, what possible needs will be hard to meet in emergency shelter environments. We have an older adults preparedness guide in FEMA on our ready.gov website that I encourage all of you to access. Ready.gov. You can also find a caregiver's guide that sort of complements the older adults guide, but each of these hopefully compel not just thoughts about what your unique needs will be, but also conversations around how your support system, your family members, people who care about you, can best help you in the event that you're displaced. In some situations, older adults like their independence, and I understand that. But to lose a loved one in a disaster when it was preventable due to lack of preparedness, all that does is hurt the family. And I encourage those conversations to begin now when it's probably not comfortable, but it's the best time to have that conversation. You don't want to wait until the storm passes and you realize you should have talked about it. You should have talked about what relocation looks like, what continuity of care looks like, what access to caregiver services look like after the fact. These things become much harder, if not impossible, if those conversations don't happen now when heads are free to think about it and the imagination can run a little bit more wilder because you can think through a lot of the difficulties.
Thank you very much. I want to thank our audience for your wonderful questions today, and also to our team for their responses. And we're just getting ready to wrap up our webinar today. And I just wanted to see if any of our panelists have any last or closing remarks or thoughts they'd like to give today.
Hi, this is Caroline again from Hawaii. I agree with what Sherman was saying about those conversations. Have them now. One thing we're doing at the State Unit on Aging is we have our disaster plan built into our assessment tool. It has been optional and was kind of like a standalone. We are looking at making it a requirement, mandatory, and putting it in the actual assessment and not a standalone. So as they're assessing individuals early when things are, before something happens, when minds are thinking clearly, and doing that is going to be important as we move forward. Thank you.
Okay.
Can I close with a few thoughts?
Anyone else?
Yeah, I'll go ahead for Guam State Office on Aging. I do know that we do work in partnership with our Public Health Emergency Preparedness Group. And so they've sent out already notices to all of public health to get information out. On our part, it will be working with our aging network to make sure, going back, again, Hawaii made a very good point. Some of our seniors may not all be digitally friendly. So getting those hard copy, the back to old school hard copy preparedness plans, and of course, reaching out to our FEMA friends for assistance on the Braille translation for those that are blind and needing that type of translation services.
Okay. It is 3:30 Eastern time, and it is time for us to close our webinar today. And I would like to thank everyone for joining us. Thank you so much, our panelists and our audience. Have a good day.